70 years from now, when the fifth generation from D-Day takes its place among this nation's citizens, I hope they will live in liberty as we have been blessed to do. I hope they know justice and opportunity, peace and plenty. But most importantly, may they gather in gratitude and honor, remembering the price paid again and again in so many places and times to secure these gifts. May they also be grateful, humble, and may they preserve the legacy of those who served and sacrificed for the generations that follow their own. May they and we never, ever forget. After many years in the making, I am honored to be here today to dedicate homage. Please join us now in the dedicatory prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, through your providence, the United States and the other nations of the Allied Expeditionary Force are today lands of freedom. We offer thanks for this shared heritage secured through the courageous, faithful, and sacrificial service of men and women in uniform. At this memorial, we remember especially the individual and the collective contributions that ensured the success of Operation Overlord. May the addition of homage to the memorial foster ever greater vigilance of liberty and remind all who see it of the price paid for the freedom in which we now live. In thanksgiving for the lives and service of those whose deeds are memorialized in this sculpture, we humbly ask your blessing upon it and upon us now in this act of dedication. Amen.
My name is Robert von der Osten, V-O-N-D-E-R-O-S-T-E-N. My ancestors were German, and here I am fighting the Germans. I spent 4 years in the Navy. I went in a couple days after Pearl Harbor, and I got out, you wouldn't believe it, the day that Japan surrendered. Then they sent me, I had enough points to get out. So I was in 5 invasions. I was in North Africa. I was in Sicily. I was in Anzio. I was in the other big one there off just south of Rome. And then I went up, we refitted up in North Island, and we put double the guns on and went down to Slapton Sands, where they had a big operation in England before the invasion. And most people don't realize it, but they had the radio mixed up. We had one frequency, the British protecting us had another one, and the German E-boats came in, and they sunk 3 of our LSTs, and there were 600 men drowned. And we were warned not to speak about it for years. And then a month later, we went into the real invasion at Omaha Beach in Normandy, and that was something else. You know, we first went in, and the Germans retook the beach, and they sent this destroyer escorts through with smoke and everything else, and start screaming for us to turn back out again. So we turned out for about 2 hours, and then they took the beach back. The Americans did, you know, and we went back in, and some of the soldiers that went off on tanks and trucks and jeeps, they they had these big crosses like they have in this monument here on the beach, but they also had mines on the beach. And some of those trucks and jeeps hit these mines, and they blew up. And the guys that went off, they brought them all back, the medics, and we had 5 or 6 doctors on board, and they laid them out all over the tank deck and in our quarters and on the mess tables. They operated on them on the way, and we took them back to England. And it was, it was a blackout, but they had a little blue light on the top so that they gave us priority to come and bring them in. Well, after that, we made about 25, 30 more trips with all kinds of equipment and all more troops. We even brought railroad cars in, and they found out that there's a beach. When you come into a beach, there's a shallow place about 30 yards out. So the LSTs would hit that, and some of these jeeps would go off and they go down and lose the guys. So then they came up just very quick. I don't know how they did it, but they come up with pontoons they put on side of the big LSTs. And the LST would hit the sandbar, and these pontoons would go forward. And then there were CBs, construction battalions. They would be riding them in, and they'd somehow pull them together in front of the where the bow doors were, where your ramp came down, and that solved it. So then they doubled the reinforcements with that thing. But in the first wave, they didn't have them, and they lost a lot of men that went off the deck with the trucks and Bing. But you'd think they would have seen that in the beginning in all the practices they had. So that's the way it went. I was a radioman first, and a signalman and a radar man. So I had 3 jobs, but I arranged to be in the wheelhouse talking to the captain up there and the lieutenant and that in the wheelhouse, and we could see out, what was going on and all. And somebody said to me, "You saw all that going on and you were in a safe place. Didn't you feel guilty?" I says, "Well, I didn't ask for it. They just signed me there. I'm not going to complain about it." So that was it.
My name is Randall E. Murph, and I served as a B-26 Bombardier Navigator with the 558th Bomb Squadron from the 387th Bomb Group. And I also, in Normandy, on D-Day, I bombed, and my bombs were away at 6:23 that morning, and the boys hit the beach at 6:30. We originally were trying to get the big guns, but those guns were in concrete, reinforced concrete, 10 feet thick, and under the ground, and the possibility of hitting them was very remote. But we thought, well, at least we will keep them busy while the boys are trying to get on the beach. And also, we would dig some holes for them to go in. If they needed to get to cover, we'd have some holes dug for them. So that's what we did. But what I wanted to tell you about is an experience I had a short time after D-Day, and I don't remember the exact date, but it was about probably 5 or 6 days after D-Day. Of course, we were all following D-Day, following the experience of D-Day and what have you. And in the barracks, England had been soaked in with fog, heavy fog for 2 days, and we were not able to fly, and we hadn't flown in a couple of days. And we were sitting around the mess hall after supper, batting the breeze, smoking a cigarette, and trying to find out what the war story was all about. And lo and behold, here came the orderly, and he said, "Murph, you're on. Briefing is in 30 minutes. And we started griping. Of all things, going to brief us for a mission this time of day in this kind of weather. The birds were even walking. And but knowing what was about to happen, I said, well, I always dressed properly for going on a mission. So I took off to the barracks and changed clothes, got on the clothes I had, and went to briefing. Briefing, they told us, we just got word from the French underground that the Germans had been hauling for 2 days straight. For the past 48 hours, they had been hauling around the clock into a forest area about 8 miles south of Caen. And that's the only thing that they gave us. And so our operation put a mission in for us, and they planned to put off 18 planes. And it so happened that I was flying on the right wing of the leader. And and they told us in briefing, we expect that this fog will be leveled off about 2,500 feet, but you are to take off and climb straight out until you break out on top. When you break out on top, we'll get together in a formation, and then we'll head for the target. Well, we did, but we took off and we were following the leader, and 2 other planes were able to get in the group, and the four of us, we started proceeding to go to Cherbourg and on to this target. But the other planes, what was happening, this fog was in high and lows, and the other planes could not get together with us. So, and we were forced to get down on the deck because the weather was so bad. We were flying just about 50 feet off the water across the channel, to the Cherbourg Peninsula, and from there we were going into Caen, and this forest area is about 8 miles south of Caen. So, and they told us in briefing, we expect this weather to be clearing, and it should be clearing by the time you reach the target. But now you will have some rough weather getting there, but it should be clearing when you get there. So, and then I'll never forget the bombing instruction that we were given. He said, you will bomb this target visually regardless of altitude. In bombardier language was, boys, be damn sure you put the eggs in the nest. So that's what we had to go with. We were on the deck going across the channel. When we reached Cherbourg Peninsula, it was beginning to clear, and we crossed the line at 1,000 feet and climbing. We were able to climb out. When we got to the target, we were at 4,500 feet. We picked up Caen, located the target, and the 4 of us bombed. And we really hit another load. The bombs were exploding, they're causing fires. The fuel tanks were exploding, creating more fires. They were spreading. The ammunition was exploding, and their supplies, we destroyed the supply. In fact, we destroyed everything that the Germans had put together for 48 hours. Well, when we turned off the target, we knew that we'd messed up somebody's problems. And we knew that we needed to get out of there as soon as we could. So we started losing altitude, and we got down to 2,500 feet, and we found ourselves right on top of the German army. And they were shooting at us at everything they had. And so, in fact, the number 4 ship was a deputy leader. He took a direct hit, cut him half in two. And when that happened, we trimmed the throttle all the way forward, went into a hard climbing turn and violent evasive action because we knew they had us bracketed. And we were able to get out. 3 of us hit the peninsula of Cherbourg. We flew up the peninsula to the English coast, and that was a squall was in progress, and it was the heaviest rain. We could not see the plane. We were flying on the right wing of the lead ship. The rain was so heavy we couldn't see that plane. We broke away to avoid mid-air collision and started climbing. We climbed out to 8,000 feet and hit icing conditions and had to come back down. And when we had to break away, I really had to start navigating then. And I had my log then, and later on, after we got several, I don't know what length of time, but the pilot asked me, says, "Murphy, where are we?" And I wanted so bad to tell him off because I hadn't seen a thing since we left Cherbourg. We'd been flying 200 miles an hour. He'd changed direction on me 5 times, altitude several times, speed several times, and asking me where they were. But he was the captain of the ship. I wasn't. So I bit my tongue and told him, "I think we're very close to home." And I said, "Well, why don't you give a tower a call and see what happened?" And of course, at the tower, our radio distance, we used a crystal radio, and the range was about 4 or 5 miles. That's all they could hear because the German was right across the channel listening to every word was said. So he called, hit the mic and said, Mother hen, this is Yellow Dog. Do you read me?" And a weak voice came back and said, "Come in, Yellow Dog." And we felt good then. They said, "Well, you got a ceiling of just over 100 feet. We're going to turn landing lights on, take runway 18, and we're going to turn the lights on for you." And so we went into our pattern, turned on the final approach, and of course it was just, if you ever been in a room completely dark, that was us. You couldn't see a thing, but we were trying to get out. And so finally, all at once, 2 rows of lights jumped up in front of us, the prettiest lights that these eyes have ever seen. And there we were on the ground. The radio man, when we landed, got out, he flopped down on the ground and kissed it. That was the end of the story.
Well, my name's Dean Scarborough, come from Anderson, and we served in during World War II, first in North Africa, in the invasions of Sicily and Italy, and then after that we came to England to get ready for the invasion of France. I was on an LST 338, the landing ship tank, what that stood for. On D-Day, I guess it was probably around 10 o'clock that morning, maybe 11. We weren't the first, and there was still a lot of fighting going on, but we never got hit, and we unloaded our cargo, our tanks, and our trucks, and got off the beach and went back to England for another load on the Normandy beach, right on the main beach.
And I understand you met General Patton?
Yeah, this was in North Africa. Yeah, he came aboard the ship to have lunch with the skipper, and I remember the chief cook. I was a baker. Said that he wanted us to make the skipper look good to Patton. And so I got the cookbook out, and I found I'd tried this before and it was real good, but I can't remember exactly what it was now, but it was a pretty delicious piece of dessert. And I've done a good job on it, but the reason, kind of mention it is after Patton left, well, the chief commissary steward, he come in, big smile, and said that when Patton left, he said, you the cooks, and especially the baker that baked that, I forget what it was, but anyway, and it kind of made me feel good, and it helped the skipper along. Well, the war had done moved on into further into Europe before we left, and we came back to the States and to get ready for the Pacific. But before we could get overseas, well, the war had ended.
Richard Thomas Alexander Jr., age 97. Is that right? I was born in 17. We were in I was in Normandy, not on D-Day, when we had, I was with the 83rd Infantry Division Artillery, and we had been sent to England in April, 1st of April, 44, and we were there in Wales I was with the Division Artillery, and they put us over into Wales where they had the artillery ranges, and we were there 1st of April. In fact, on the 5th of May, the 5th of June, we had been there about 6-8 weeks. We had been, since we were an artillery unit, we had been at the artillery ranges in Wales, and on the night of the 5th of June, I, along with my Division Artillery, I was with Division Artillery, we were getting ready for some artillery practice at one of the artillery ranges in Western Wales. And the next morning we were out early, and we were getting ready to just practice at one of their ranges, and the British, it was a British artillery range, and we had just waited for daylight, so it was about 6 o'clock in the morning we started firing during this period at this artillery range in Wales, and a British officer who was there with us came in and told my boss that he said the balloon is up. This was the morning of the 6th. We went over the afternoon late of the 5th, we were going to practice fires for a couple hours and go back to England. And so that caused a good deal of excitement. And I remember when this gentleman came over to talk to our commanding general, he said the balloon is up, and I thought, what balloon? And what this expression was, meaning that the invasion had started. And this was the morning of the 6th. When we got back later that afternoon, after we had practiced out on the range, we went back to England, and when we got there back to England, we were on 3-hour alert, and eventually we went to, we were up in the Midlands, up near south of Liverpool, and we eventually left there for the south of England, and we sailed from Weymouth. That's where we went left on the. It was the 18th of June before they got us over there, and we spent. Well, we were a little late landing at Omaha Beach because of the storm that hit. I don't know if you've had any record of that, but a very bad storm hit the night of, we sailed on the 18th of June from Weymouth, headed for, we didn't know where, but we knew we were going to the continent. And we got out about halfway across English Channel. During the night, this terrible storm blew up, and we spent 4 more days out in the channel for the storm to blow through. And when the storm was over, then we landed there at Omaha Beach. And that would have been about 22nd of June is when I physically put my foot down there at Omaha Beach. At that time, I was the Division Artillery Operations Sergeant. And my job was to work in the Fire Direction Center of the 83rd Infantry Division Artillery. I was 83rd Infantry Division, but I was under the artillery, Division Artillery. And I was, at that time, I was the senior NCO in the Fire Direction Center. And that meant that I had great responsibilities in what we did when we got to where we were supposed to go. And we did sail. We weren't able to land straight away because of the storm. And we landed, I think it was on the 22nd of June, right there at, well, it was at Omaha Beach is what it was, down at the base of the well, we got off the landing ship. There's a bluff there about 100 feet tall that's where the LST pulled in, and we had to go down about a half a mile on the beach to get where it was sufficiently low, and there was a road that led up to the roadway. So it was about 100 feet above that's where we actually landed, and we didn't have any more beach than from here to over the wall there, and it was just a sheer beach, bluff, and but we eventually went down the beach about a quarter of a mile, maybe half a mile, back up on a service road to the road was up on the above, and that was right above, directly above Omaha Beach, and that was on the 22nd of June. So we weren't there on D-Day. Well, that was in June of 44, and we stayed in France until September. But after being there in Normandy, we were there. We went to Carentan, if you know where that is. That's where we, after we went up off the ship, we went to Carentan for about a month, and that's where where the front was at the time. And we stayed there until August of '44 in Carentan, at which time there was I think that was the date, it was the last 27th, 28th of July, that was the breakout, if you know that part of it. Nobody had gone very far other than to pretty close to Carentan. And then it was about the 1st of August is when we broke out. They brought in the Third Army, came over. We were with First Army at that time. Third Army came over, and we broke out of Normandy. And I think it was in August when we got out of there, and we went down south into Brittany. That's what it was. So we were there a good part of June and all of July and up until the middle of August or so. I was a little different than some of those. I was with the Headquarters Battery Division Artillery of the 83rd Infantry Division. We trained in Indianapolis when I was drafted, and I was assigned to Camp Atterbury, which is outside of Indianapolis, and I became I was the operations sergeant with the Division Artillery. I was a little different than a lot of the draftees. I was 26 years old. I was a high school science teacher. I had lived in Germany myself. When I was quite young, I went to the University in Berlin for a couple of years and spoke the language and had never used it much other than just, but I'd lived in Berlin about 4 years. This is before I was in the Army. And so when we were getting ready to go overseas, we didn't know whether we were going to Japan or where we were going. But anyway, fortunately, we went to Germany. I was quite pleased to go because I knew the situation pretty well, and as a result, because of my background in Germany, I had a pretty good job. I was not a desk. I wasn't. In fact, I wasn't an officer at the time. Finally, they gave me a battlefield commission once we got onto the continent. But I stayed with the 83rd Division Artillery Headquarters I was in the Army 38 months. It was all on the same. They had no intention of getting rid of me because of my command of German and Germany. I was fortunate. But I did see a lot of action. It was not just a office job, although we had a lot of paperwork to do as headquarters. But I was assigned to flying status once we got to Europe, and an infantry division at that time we had about a dozen airplanes, the little Piper Cubs. We had about a dozen of them, and they were all assigned to the artillery battalions and headquarters. And I became one of the two aerial observers out of the Division Artillery Headquarters, which I got flying pay, and had no special training in it at all, but they just said, get in and go. But it was particularly in Normandy, when we were in Carentan, all you could see when we landed there in Carentan was across the road to the first trees. And it was just and if it hadn't been for the planes we had, where we could fly up and look down, we wouldn't have seen anything. And so that was one of my responsibilities I was not the pilot, I was simply the guy that played with the radio and did the artillery firing from it. So that became part of my job too, and I flew, I think about 120 missions over a period of about 11 months. Didn't fly every day. I got extra pay for it. Got flying pay.
I was born in Annapolis, Maryland, and raised in Morehead City, North Carolina. The reason being I was a Depression child along with other people my age. I'm currently 88 years old. I got the opportunity to be involved in a Normandy operations through enlistment in the United States Navy on my 17th birthday, 1943. I was going to go, I was very patriotic. I was like a lot of other people around. We had to get over there, we had to end it, we had to win. And so I enlisted in the United States Navy. And as I was going through basic training, I filled out a form and it said, do you have any small boat operation experience? And I said, yes, and he explained it was with my grandfather, tending beacon lights in Bow Sound. When I left boot camp, they sent me to Norfolk to train on an LCVP, a small boat, the Higgins boat as they're referred today. I learned the way to run a boat the Navy way. In other words, I had to run it aground. And if I'd have run my grandfather's boat aground, it'd have broke my neck, I think. But anyhow, I learned to run one aground. And all the little things that go along with it. They trained us there, down to Fort Pierce, Florida, where we were trained, and then over to Europe. I picked up an LST 357 in a little town called Fowey, England. And they had the boat, and a boat was assigned to me, and I was assigned to the LST. Basically a mothership. And we trained and got prepared for Normandy. I didn't really appreciate what we were doing until May the 26th of 1944. I knew we were going to go into Europe, but the enormity of it, the size of it didn't impress me. And we were notified that we were going to have a major inspection. The ship had been involved in other actions and had a good record. So we lined up, and the captain pulled me aside and put me in charge of the crew's quarters. I was a 17-year-old kid. He was afraid I might screw up, and so he put me there. Okay, as the gentleman came aboard, it was not an admiral, it was King George VI of England. And he came into the ship and looked around and asked Captain Blackburn, I'd like to see the crew's quarters, I'd like to see where the crew lives. Well, that's where he'd stuck the 17-year-old kid to keep him out of trouble. He stayed out of trouble. I didn't open my mouth the wrong way. When the king asked me where I was from, I told him Morehead City, North Carolina. A little old boy from Morehead City shaking hands with the King of England. It was one of my big days, one of my big days. That's when that day was over, I realized, hey, something big's coming. And I could see it then, I focused on. And the ships, the amount of cargo and things that were being loaded out of Weymouth Harbor. And we sailed on the 4th, we started and were withdrawn because of the weather, as everyone knows, and sailed again on the 5th. We arrived off of Normandy around 4 o'clock in the morning. Around 5, the visibility was very good. And I climbed up on deck and I was amazed, I was shocked I have never seen so many ships in my life. Years later, when I researched it, I realized there was approximately 2,500 ships in the American sector alone. Everything from the battleship Nevada down. And it was just, I was amazed. We've got ready to go, and the second thing that told me this was a big deal, we had steak and eggs for breakfast. I hadn't seen a piece of fresh meat since October when I went overseas from New York. And it was that they had taken on those supplies very quietly and froze the steaks, and they had them for us for our breakfast to go into Normandy. About 5 o'clock, about 5:30, the company, 6 o'clock, the captain gave the command away all boats. We took our boats, went over to the troop transport, and loaded them into our LCBPs, and I was delegated the third wave. And the men were from the Big Red One. So we circled around, headed in, and we hit the beach and the third wave. We plowed in, and just at the instant we hit the beach, around 88 went into the boat, blew the first 4 men to pieces, wounded the other 2, and the rest of the men, in valor and in bravery I have never seen before, I've seen several times since, but never before. These men stepped over their comrades, went down the ramp, and ran into the bullets that the Germans were throwing at them. By the time we got the ramp up and I couldn't see anymore, I had seen 3 more American soldiers drop into the surf. And I had put my boat as far up as I could put it. We backed out. And then we had one objective. We had to get the wounded and the dead to the hospital ship. We accomplished that mission. At one time, we had to go down I did the job myself with another sailor and clean the intestines of the 2 wounded men out of the bilge pump screen so they could pump and we wouldn't sink. I made 4 more trips into the beach that day. We went in, we hauled troops in, and we hauled the wounded out. And the hardest part was waiting for the medics to load the wounded into the boats because we were under fire up until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And one of the most vivid scenes in my memory is a soldier strapped to a stretcher being cartwheeled through the air from an explosion of an 88 millimeter shell. And my mind will always see it slow motion. That was the things that I saw. The thing that amazes me and affected my life with this was the bravery, the valor, the courage that American soldiers showed. The British did the same, but I can only talk about that little speck, easy red, Omaha Beach. And I saw nothing there but valor. When those men saw their buddies being cut down, they didn't turn and run. They kept moving forward. Nobody hollered, "I don't want to go." They kept moving forward. And it was, of all the things, it actually formed the way I would live the rest of my life. It gave me the courage to face adversity, to face things that I knew that I don't know whether I could have faced them again or not. I was surrounded in Daejeon, Korea. We had been given the order that we could surrender. It would not be dishonorable to surrender. And I told them to go to hell, we wouldn't surrender. And we fought our way out for 2 solid days. And I brought 36 men out of there. And I had to have that in Vietnam because of the stupidity I run across. And if I had not had the background of Normandy, I don't believe I could have survived Korea or Vietnam. There have been other occasions in my life that Normandy has been there. When my wife looked at me in 1969 and says, "You're going to college." I only had a GED high school. She said, "You could go through Normandy, you could go through Daejeon, and you can't go back to college." 3.5 years later, I walked out with a master's degree in American history. And then I taught the Battle of Normandy, exactly as it was. Exactly as it was. One day, I'll get done real quick. One day I was looking at my class. I always devoted a full hour to Normandy. And I didn't have them. They were kind of looking off, you know. You know how college kids are. They were thinking about the date that night. And I kind of hesitated, and I said, you know, I want to tell you something. Last year I walked through the cemetery on the ridge at Easy Red, Omaha Beach. 9,663 graves. 9,663 crosses. So precise in line that you look down the line and move your head 2 inches and you're looking at a solid line of ivory. That's not, they are the heroes. They are the heroes of all of this. I am only a survivor and very proud of it. They are the heroes. Because remember, not one of those men had ever eaten a Big Mac. Not one had seen a Burger King. Not one had ever seen French fries or Kentucky Fried Chicken. And Lord knows they didn't know what a bluebird was, or a blue jay, or a cell phone. That got their attention, and they knew what I was saying. So I've spent my life, since I received that degree, I spent 26 years with the university. I've had 2 careers, 2 military. 1 military, 26 years, and 1 academic, 26 years. And I spent my time teaching American history as it was, and the battles as they truly were. But Normandy, we must never forget, and this is my mind, my feeling, this was the most magnificent, most well-planned, the most well-executed battle in the history of the United States Navy. Oh, sure, there were goof-ups. Of course, boats floundered. But I'm talking about the overall picture. No, even the great sailors of the Mediterranean could never do what we did. And that's the way I see it, and we'll always remember it. And every opportunity I get, I tell it. The last opportunity was Memorial Day at a senior citizens house, a care, assisted living. I had 32 ladies and 7 men above the age of 80, and I gave them a talk on Normandy. I don't stop anywhere. I'll take them from the first grade to the top, because to me, it was the greatest battle, the greatest thing we have ever done. Where would we be today if we had lost? Where would we be today if we hadn't even gone? So it was instrumental in being one of the most outstanding moments of our government. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to bring that out the way I feel. Well, I kind of Earl W. Norwood, and I'm currently at a place called Ashwood Manor in Asheville, North Carolina.
Dudley R. Brown. I'm originally from New Jersey. I live in Hendersonville right now. And my experience on D-Day was I was assigned to the 8th Air Force. I flew a top turret gunner, flight engineer and top turret gunner on a B-17G named the Friend of Sea. And when we were over there, we had a crew of 11, and we knew something was up because they got us up early that morning, earlier than usual. But it was a overlord was kept pretty good secret there, and nobody knew anything about it. The officers went to briefing, and they come back and said, "Boys, this is it." So we got in our planes and took off, and as we formed up above the clouds, it was a cloudy day that day. In fact, they were supposed to go the 5th of June, but they had bad weather, and Eisenhower postponed it. But they had to go the next day, but they still had some clouds. But when we got over to the English Channel, and there was a break in the clouds, all you could see was ships. Couldn't see the water hardly. Once in a while you'd see it, but just like the gentleman before me, all those ships were gone, and you knew at once that a lot of those boys weren't coming back. We had a bombing raid into France itself. I think the city around Caen, C-A-E-N, I think it is, and that was our target, and we successfully bombed where we were supposed to, and got back to base, and some of the planes went back out again, but we didn't have to. So, I'd say through two or three missions that day, and after that, I flew 33 missions, and I came back home in September of '44.
I'm Andy Andrews, and I'm 90 years old, and when I was 20 years old, I was on a Higgins boat going to Normandy Beach. I can't believe that I was on that Higgins boat, but the three main things that I remember about the whole war is the preparation, the strike, and the suffering all over the world, all over Europe. But anyway, I remember being in England, taking training and seeing miles and miles and miles of tanks and jeeps and weapons carriers and ambulances as far as you could see. And that's when I realized each one of those things had to have a driver. And when I heard that there were 175,000 men getting ready to attack England and 30,000 vehicles, I realized that what I had seen, somebody had to go get them and put them on a ship, go across 100 miles of water, and be ready to go to the beach. My memories of that special trip was being on a troop carrier that had 5,000 men on it, and the captain came on and said, "Welcome," and I felt welcome. And he said, "When these big engines stop, you guys will be 12 miles from France, 12 miles from combat." And sure enough, we were all sitting on a steel floor, and nobody was talking, nobody was shooting craps, nobody playing cards. It was dark, and we just sat there thinking about home, our dog, our wives, our families, our brothers. And those engines stopped, and they said, "H Company upstairs." So H Company got up and walked up 3 flights of steel steps, went out on the deck, and that was our first sight of France. But we couldn't see France because of the smoke. We saw the hill country behind it. And right next to our ship, the SS Texas battleship was anchored and was shooting those great big 14-inch shells, and we were glad because we thought they were going to land on the beach, but they went behind the beach. The beach was just as smooth as candy, smooth as could be. Weren't any holes. They told us there'd be a lot of holes for you guys to hide in, but there weren't any holes. But it was interesting thing. We went over the side on these big rope ladders down into the Higgins boats. We could see the Higgins boats circling. Must have been 100 of them. But all over the ocean you could see ships. You could throw a ball from one ship to the other. 6,000 ships in the English Channel, all of them heading toward the beach. And I was standing beside the deck master, when the beach master telephoned, radio, he said, "Don't send the troops yet. There is no place to land. Too many dead soldiers in the water, too much destruction on the beach. Wait till I call you." And we heard that before we went over the side. That was an exciting time. But all of us were young and we were afraid. But you know, courage overpowers fear. And we discovered that. And so we went, finally he said, "Okay, send the guys." So we went down the rope ladder and dropped off into the Higgins boat. But just below me, I saw a guy miss his footing, and he fell into the ocean between the Higgins boat and the ship and went straight to the bottom. We had grenades all over us. I don't know how much we weighed, but we weighed a lot. And but I got to the end of the rope ladder, and the guy hollered, said, "Okay, we're going to pull the rope ladder into the Higgins boat. Just drop." So I dropped, and I hit the floor, and it was about 2 or 3 inches of vomit all over the floor. Everybody was throwing up. I didn't throw up, but I almost did. But I finally got my footing and stood in the Higgins boat, squatted down in the Higgins boat, and the guy right behind me threw up all over my back, and it went down my shirt. He had spaghetti and meatballs for supper, I think. But anyway, it was all over me, and I was glad when the Higgins boat got to the beach and the ramp went down. We got this deep in the water, and I was glad to wash it off. But anyway, we were lucky because we were the third wave, and the first and second wave got up on the beach, and they took all of the rifle fire and machine gun fire, but some of those guys got through and got behind and killed all those riflemen. The only thing we had to worry about was artillery, with the German artillery coming over. The Higgins boat right next to mine got a direct hit by a German 88. We assumed it was 88 because everything exploded. Guys went up in the air and the whole thing sunk within a minute. And we were just very fortunate. God was good to me and kept me safe all the way through. So that was my experience on D-Day. 70 years from this morning. I can't believe it. But I thank God for taking care of me and for giving us the victory. When we saw the German concentration camps and death camps, there were over 400 death camps in Belgium and Germany. And I just couldn't figure how many really bad people it took to operate those things. But that's what we were after, trying to eliminate that problem all over Europe. And my comment is that God took care of us and showed us how to win the battle.
My name is Sergeant Jesse Bowman from Granite Falls, North Carolina. And I went into the Army by drafting. Took my basic training in Fort Walters, Texas. Went to Fort Meade, Maryland after that as a POE, port of embarkation. And the next morning they separated all the men in 2 groups. And I was in a group that went to Columbia, South Carolina, joined the 87th Infantry. And then I went to England, the whole group, 15,000 in Division 87th Infantry. And then we went to England, stayed there a few weeks, and then went over to Le Havre, France. There's where we started battle. And we went from there all the way to Czechoslovakia, through the Battle of the Bulge, through Ordain Forest, through the Black Forest, across the Rhine River at Koblenz. And we took Koblenz, and then we crossed the Rhine at Beauport, about 15 miles up the river. And then we battled all the way. The most worst battles was the Battle of the Bulge and St. Vith. St. Vith was taken 3 times by the U.S. Army, and finally there was nothing left. So we went on, and as time went on, it got a little bit easier because the SS troopers began to surrender, and that was Hitler's main army. And when we saw that they were getting ready to surrender, we knew the end would be soon. And we went on to Plauen, Germany. That's where the war ended. Just before that, we had 154 days of straight combat. And everybody was woolly. And one of the men wrote home and told them to send us some barber tools. So this guy got them, and he got tired of carrying them around, so he gave them to me. And when we got to Plauen, I sent the men down the woods to cut a big tree, big enough to sit on, cut piece about 4 foot long, and we buried it, and that was my first barber chair.
Did you become a barber?
Yes, I later became a barber and barbered 30 years. And but when we left Plauen, when the war ended, we left Plauen, and we left Jeeps, trucks, medicals, everything. We just left everything there. We was 12 miles inside of Germany from Czechoslovakia. And the young men from Czechoslovakia and the young Germans took over that equipment, the Jeeps, trucks, and everything. Okay, 2.5 years ago, on April 15th, they had planned this convoy. When the Siegfried Line was drawn between the U.S. and Russia, Plauen became in Russian territory, and they hated the Russians because they stole everything they could get their hands on and shipped it back to Russia. And in 1997, the Russians pulled out, and the U.S. went back in. And this group that arranged this convoy, they worked on it for 2 years. And they invited as many soldiers that was in the 87th Infantry to come and help them celebrate their independence from Russia. So there was 5 of us went back to Germany, April 15th, this past 2 years ago. And we were treated like kings. The operators of the Jeeps and the trucks, they looked as good or better than it did when we left them. 1943 models. And this convoy, there must have been about 15 pieces of equipment, Jeeps and trucks. And we had a police escort, took us from town to town to town to town for 3 days, all over northwestern Germany. And the operators of the Jeeps, they had on U.S. uniforms, and most all of them had American flags. they were so happy that the United States came back and helped them celebrate their independence from Russia. And we stayed there 4 days. And we were treated better than kings.
My name is Paul Arnold Howe, and I was in the military police, 1120th Military Police Aviation, attached to the Air Force. And 314th Air Force Command was at my base. And for 6 weeks before D-Day, they had the 82nd Airborne off the base in a fenced-in area, preparing them for this invasion. Now, I was a military, I was never a hero. I was a company clerk for the 1120th MP Company Aviation. And on the night of that they took the forces over to Normandy, my job was to drive around the base in a Jeep and be sure nobody lighted a light or lit a cigarette or had any light, because we were afraid we had C-47s. And those were just old lumberjacks, you know, they were just, but they carried the troops, they pulled the gliders, but we were afraid the Germans would follow them back and bomb us. Little did we know that the German Air Force was decimated at that time. There was nothing left. But so we didn't have a problem, but we made sure there were no lights lighted that night. And it was interesting, 4 men that we took over came back. They wouldn't jump. And they put them in the guardhouse there at the base. We were at a little place called Saltby, England, and I say a little place, a little town, but a big base. It was a large base. My home was in Orlando, Florida at the time, and I was working as a stenographer for the Coastline Railroad in Mulberry, Florida, and I was drafted March the 4th, 1943. I told my mother that I had to get in this war because everybody looked at you funny if you were in civilian clothes. I was 19. But I had a girlfriend and a bicycle in Mulberry that I didn't want to leave. So I waited till they drafted me. I was discharged on January 10th, 1946. And the great value to me was I was able to get a full education. I got my bachelor's degree and became a CPA as a result of that. I had no college when I went in. I was a corporal, a technician, 5th grade, and I wanted to be an officer so bad, but officers had to have an education.
Terrence Dotson, and first of all, I want to say thanks to the Rotary International for making this possible. This has been great, and I do appreciate it. It's really good. But tonight, as I look around and see these older people, I realize that I played a very insignificant part in the invasion because I was just a teenager. Just happened to be there. But these men, they done what needed to be done. They are really the ones that we should praise. But the real heroes, folks, are those that's overlooking the English Channel and the cemeteries that contain over 3,000 of our young men, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age, that gave their lives during the invasion that we might be free. And I thank God for them. That's been real good. I did go ashore. I went ashore D+2. We sat out there in the harbor and waited until the beaches was cleared so we could go ashore. I was on an LST, which contained trucks, trailers, all filled with ammunition. Also, we had a wrecker and a parts truck. And my task was that I was a mechanic, and a member of Service Battery. And as a result of that, it was our duty and our responsibility to make sure that the rest of the battalion had groceries, had clothing, had ammunition, and we also had to keep the vehicles repaired, and that was no easy task. Because when they was shot up, we had trouble. We'd cannibalize everything we could and keep them going. And as I said before, I went ashore with a group of older men, and would you believe I didn't have to shave? Maybe once in a while, but I got by. Most of these men was old. There's some of them 32 years old. My motor sergeant was 32 years old, and I thought he was ancient. Of course, I was just a child. But anyhow, he was good to me. Our battalion commander was a lieutenant colonel. He was 40. He was a good old feller, very good. And they all treated me good, for which I am grateful. And I'm grateful for Rotary International for letting me be here tonight. And I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for all of this.
My name is Albert Douglas Brown. I don't like the Albert, so they call me Doug. And I just, to help you remember, Doug is the past tense of dig, and I'm a retired mortician. They used to call me Digger. I joined the Army when I was in Greenbrier Military School, finishing my pre-med in October of 1942. I joined the enlisted reserve, which I found out that it meant I was in the Army now. So in May of 1943, I was called into active duty 2 weeks before school was out. They gave me 10 days to report to Columbus, Ohio, where I was inducted in, but I can still remember my number, and I was too proud to be drafted, so they gave me 153-15337. I am 91 and a half years old and feel good. I get along very good. And I did my training in Texas in October of 42. I finished my basic training, went over on the original Queen Elizabeth to Scotland at night. We got off the ship, got on a train, went to near Weymouth, England, where we later were stationed and did our training, because Weymouth down on the southwest coast was similar, I guess, to the Normandy beach. And we got on our landing craft infantry on the 5th of June, stayed out in the water all night. A lot of the guys got sick. We cut each other's hair. That would have been enough to scare the Germans. But then I went in on the second wave and landed on Omaha Easy Red Beach. I was very fortunate, I feel, to have gotten in with the 1st Division, because a lot of the guys had survived North Africa and Sicily, and they knew what was going on. This was my course first. I was in Company B, 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry of the 1st Division. Came out of the war with 3 Purple Hearts and some other things, but when the war ended, we were down in the Sudetenland, a small place called Cheb, and we stayed there for a while, but I found out the medals, which I didn't think was worth a cup of coffee, gave me 5 points, and so I came home before my outfit, the 1st Division, remained in Nuremberg, Germany, at the Palace of Justice, where they were trying the Nazis. And as I said, I had planned to go into medicine when I got home. My father was a mortician and working by himself, and so I had the privilege to go in business with him. Went back to college in Philadelphia, to Mortuary College for 12 months. And I think that was my calling. And of course, we always tried to keep our spirits up. We pulled into Normandy and was out on a point before Cherbourg and the other, I can't remember the other seaport, had still remained in the German arms. So my home was about 30 days or a few extra in a foxhole, but we did probes and so forth. A story I like to tell, one day a new lieutenant showed up. We called them 90-day wonders. And he said, we're going on a patrol and our mission is to capture a German, which was a pretty big calling. But I'd been in the area, of course, for a long time. So I said, I'll take first scout. And the little trick that I'd learned pretty quick, and the Germans found out about it. The first 2 scouts were private or PFCs, private first class. And the Germans would take out the 3rd man because he was the non-com of the squad. Anyhow, this lieutenant, being new, was trying to strip us down of anything that would make a noise or something. We, of course, at this time had put on bandoliers of ammunition besides our belt and so forth. And so he was having us take all this stuff off. And finally he said, I think you ought to take your canteen off. I said, Lieutenant, we carry morphine. If we're wounded, we give ourselves a shot, and we need that water because we get very dry. Well, okay. So we take off on our mission, going through this woods there in Normandy. And of course, we gave sign signals. We didn't use verbal words. And I heard a noise. So I thought, well, happy day. We're going to get our mission completed here shortly. It turned out to be a hog. It was coming through this woods on this old road. And of course, the guys then got back and sort of in this formation there. Then I heard another noise, and I gave the signal again, and this time, here comes a German. Now, the day was cold, sort of cold, wet, and I can remember he had his poncho on and his rifle, as we would do, slung on his shoulder underneath the poncho. But again, I thought, well, our mission's going to be completed pretty quick. But I don't know whether the new lieutenant wanted to be a hero or whether he didn't know any better, but he jumped out to take the German prisoner. And of course the German turned and took off. And of course that stopped our mission because he went back to his lines. So we turned and was coming back, and we always like to put a little spice in our worries. And coming from West Virginia, I knew how to milk a cow. And of course, through the bombing of our allies, had taken out a lot of the gasoline. And so the Germans had confiscated all the horses to pull their armor, so forth. But here was this cow meandering down in front of us, and so I thought, well, I know how to milk a cow, and I'll show these fellows from New York and so forth what a country boy can do. So I found this cow. I knew she'd had a calf recently, and I eased up and put my hand on her rump, and she put her foot back, and I got my canteen cup out, and I began to milk some milk. Now, I ad-lib here just a little bit, if you don't mind. One of the guys from New York was watching what I was doing, and he said, well, I'll be damned, I thought it came out of a can. So I drank some of the warm milk, and we went on. As I said, I was wounded near Marigny, France, the first time, concussion, and one of the disappointments at that time, I played a saxophone and entertained. Well, we had a dance band, and Glenn Miller, of course, was one of the big ones, and I learned while I was in the recovery ward that he and the pilot on their way to Paris had gone down in a storm. But after the war was over, we, of course, were down near Cheb, I think it was. We were in a small community, and a chaplain played a saxophone. So somebody went to Pilsen and brought back some instruments, and so we would entertain the troops when we could. And at that time, young people probably don't know about it, but one of the favorite songs was Sentimental Journey. And I remember one evening we were playing one night, and the guys would come up pretty often and say, would you play Sentimental Journey again? So I got home on Columbus Day, 1945, and it's been a great life, and I think the good Lord has left me here for some reason, but anyhow, I have been telling a few other stories, and thank you guys for allowing this, and really appreciate the fact my son owns a house over on Smith Mountain Lake, so we don't have far to go, and the people that put this together are really to be complimented. And so I want to thank you for this. I did have my mug showing on, there's a program I think still on television, Sunday morning, and the producer, when we were over here, I guess when the memorial was built, but they traveled with us, members of the 1st Division, and the producer of the program and foreign correspondent. And they designated me to start the morning off on the bus with a story. So we'll reserve that for another time. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Well, my life story, of course, I was born and raised in a little community they call Lester, North Carolina. My name is Ray Andrews, and I was born in 1925, so that makes me 89 now. And I was just on the farm, but it was during the Depression. And of course, my father died when I was 8, and things were really tough. So we went, I'd work on a farm for as little as 5 or 10 cents an hour on a local farm to make me some change. And then I went to school, but along about 6th grade, I think it was, I'd skipped a grade. I don't know whether it was my laziness or didn't know enough. But anyway, that put me a little bit behind. And when I should have been finished at 17, I wasn't. So in April of when I was 18, I got my notice draft. And a couple of weeks later, I was in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And then about 3 weeks later, I was shipped to the state of Washington. A young fellow who had hardly been anywhere, and here I was all that distance away from home. And I was there for about 3 months, and I had a furlough home. And you can imagine the only thing I could do was come home by train, and only had 1 week. So most of the week was on that train, and a very short stay at home, probably not more than a couple of days or so. But anyway, then I returned. They shipped me out of Seattle, and because of the war, they didn't want them to know where troops were being shipped. So they sent us up to Canada, and we crossed Canada and then back down into New York. And we was at Shanks, New York. And fortunately, boarded the Queen Elizabeth, who had been converted into a troop ship. And we sailed just the ship itself, but every 5 minutes it would change its course in fear of the U-boats, German U-boats. So we went there and we were about 5 days out, and we landed in England, Liverpool. We landed in Liverpool and got off the ship, and it was put us in a convoy, and then I was in the States. I was trained in what is called the 605th Graves Registration. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I know that we trained. The fact is that we would be identifying casualties and things of that nature, and probably in a cemetery. So so I was sent to, after we got off in Liverpool, being a boy who could drive anything, come along, they sent us down to Exeter, England, and I was put on TDY, temporary duty and I drove a Jeep and I would go up to Liverpool, and there would be a large convoy come in, and then get them all lined up, and we would have the officer in charge, whoever is in charge, and head at night down through London, which had no signs on the road because they was afraid the Germans were going to come and they'd taken all the signs down. So you had to know where you was going, and then of course it was very easy for that convoy of 75 or 100 trucks to get broken up, failing at night, because that's when they were moving them. And it was quite a chore, because you never know who you was going to get to be the head of the convoy. But it was always funny. Some of the officers was real nice if they had a lot of brass. When they sat down, the higher the brass, the nicer they were to us. But we went at night and brought them down to parts of England, and we took them with just a little bitty lights, and one followed the other on the back of your vehicle. And you would take them to some part of England, and which later was shipped to France after the invasion started. So that was my first touch of war when I was in Falmouth, England. They moved us down there, and I was in what they call the 605th Graves Registration, but it was they would split us up, and they split up our platoon and sent part of us one place and part the other. So they sent about 12 of us, and they sent us to Falmouth or Plymouth, and then split us again, and we went down to Falmouth, England, and then on the 5th, well, before they shipped us out, the Germans come over and did a lot of good bumming work, and we were building this house about 100, maybe 110 feet from the railroad yard. And they planted a 500-pounder right in the middle of that railroad yard. And we'd got out of the house and was laying up against the hedgerow. And by our luck, we were laying in a garden that was a dud. But that dud sunk a hole in the railroad yard about 10 feet in diameter. And but we were, if it had went off, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here today to talk to you or anybody else. But anyway, they did hit a hotel with about 700 GIs in it. And of course, that was my first real test of war, because the fact is that about 2 o'clock in the morning, they called us because I was in the 605th registration, and they wanted us down there for identification and so forth. To process dead, that's what we was really doing. And we made all the papers and things that's necessary to get them. And that was the real first taste of war that I had. I mean, real tough, because we had to, was carrying them out of there on our back in pieces, and about 700 men was in that hotel. And we carried them out of there, or most of them was carried out, and then we took care of them. And that's when Ray got sick as a mule, and I just couldn't stop to eat because I just felt sick. And later on that day, this major came by and said, "Anders, come go over to the mess hall with me and get something to eat." So we went over to the mess hall, and he orders up a steak. And I said, "Major, I can't eat. I'm so sick today. Hadn't had anything to eat." And he looked over at me and sort of patted me on the back, and he said, "Now, Anders, this damn war isn't over yet, so you get to eat." I ate that steak, and from then on I ate everything that was loose. Well, then after that was over, then of course they'd split us up again and moved us. I moved down to Falmouth, England, and we split there, and we had about 12 well, it was 25 when we got to Plymouth, which was a platoon. And then they split the platoon and sent 12 of us on down to Falmouth. When they were getting ready, we knew that the invasion was coming. No question in our mind that it was coming, because we knew enough about what was going on to determine that something big was fixing to happen. So so they loaded us up on the 5th of, we was on the ship at about the 4th or 5th, which takes about, from there to France, takes about 2 days on this small LST. And so we had loaded us up, and we shipped out of there to France at, on about June the 4th, and we was out on our way over there when D-Day actually happened. We was out there headed, and then when we got to, we went in at Falmouth, France. It was Falmouth, France, and that was just to the right of where the main part of D-Day had hit. And we went in there on the 8th, and the ship was one of the little LST, one of these where you could let the end of it down, but we didn't get in to shore with that thing. Mostly, I guess, because of tide and so forth. And I'll never forget these Seabees. They had tied a batch of 55-gallon drums together, thrown some boards on it, and an outboard motor on it. We climbed down the rope ladder and got on that thing, and he took us in to shore. And then he went back for another load. So that's how we got into the France coast. And then we joined up, being a small outfit, that we got together, we joined, kind of split up for several things. One thing was to keep us separated from any German activity that was going on, because they were still shooting airplanes down. I recall seeing as many as 3 at a time falling out of the air when we were moving in. So they sort of kept us separated to be sure that we didn't go in a group. So our first food and rations was with the 82nd and 101st. I didn't know which one, because they'd already jumped. They're in France, was where, and that was actually the first others of the Americans that I saw. And then we started, I guess, sort of on the route over there to work on the cemetery they were building for the invasion. And we worked there doing identification work and all of that. And later there was, last I counted, I knew of there was 450,000 men buried in that cemetery of D-Day and the operation I was trying to get into France. Because the Germans had already taken over France, and France had surrendered to the Germans. So they were on shore shooting at our planes and us. Well, I was there about a month, or a little better, at the cemetery, and I don't remember now how many was buried there when I left, because I was only there about, I'd say, a month and a half, or a little better. Time is hard to come by when you, at age, you know, are going, things were happening fast and you had to move. So I left from there and followed sort of Patton's route up through there. They took us up until after I was there on the beach, and we followed sort of Patton's route up to there and wound up at Champagnole, a little village town. Had one road through it and one street. And so they established a cemetery there, and it had 1,400 burials in it when it left, and then so I was there for I'd say about a year and a half. And of course, since I drove the Jeep and one thing and another, I would be bounced around at some of the other places, like up in Luxembourg or down in southern France, where things were not going too well, or a cemetery established down there. So I was at Reims, which was USFET headquarters, which was about 20 miles away up north. And fortunately, I got up there one day, and when I'd taken this lieutenant up there, and I was sitting there waiting on him with the Jeep, and out came Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and Blood and Guts, they called him, and another, I don't remember his name, but they stood there and took and a reporter was talking to him, and I was sitting there waiting on this lieutenant, so that was quite a treat for me to see all those men there at Reims, France. So I drove back about 20 miles to Champagnole. Champagnole was the cemetery. What I did was we had a tent office, and I did paperwork mostly and answered a lot of questions for people. And I saw my first miracle there, or miracle if you believe in such things. But this Lieutenant Johnson, who flew a fighter, P-47, I think it was, and he came down there and he said that his brother was buried there, and could we find him? And I said, sure. So I looked it up there, and I took him down there, showed him where it was. Well, later he came back and he said, would anybody be wrong if I came across and dropped a wreath on this cemetery? I said, I don't reckon so, as long as you circle, let us know that you're going to do such a thing, because I don't want no wreath going around my neck or anybody. And he said, yeah, I'll do that. So he did. And it was unbelievable. He circled that thing and dropped that wreath. And that wreath went around his brother's cross. Unbelievable. We couldn't believe it. No one ever believed that such a thing would happen. With that many burials in a cemetery, to drop a wreath out of an airplane and it come down and go around his brother's grave. So that's some of the things that I saw. And of course I drove, and then I left Champagnole and was shipped to, the latter part was shipped to southern France, and then over, put on a boat in the Mediterranean Sea, and we came back across out to Gibraltar and headed to home. That was the funniest thing. We left that little old ship was called, I forget now, there's a town in South Carolina named after it, or with the same name, Rock Hill Victory. And we left there on, in the Mediterranean Sea on the 29th day of November. We got out in there and hit the North Atlantic with a lot of storms and stuff, and we didn't get into New York until the 6th of January. And that's a long ship ride as you bumped along the North Atlantic. And so we, from there, it was 40, I got home and met my wife, who had been writing to for 3 years, got married. And from there, it's been a long time, but we've been married for 68 years and loved it.
Okay, I'm Charles Wace Walker. I was born in 1922, which means I lived through the Great Depression. In 1942, the second day of the year, I was able to get a job at Duke Power Company, which there was no job back during the Depression, you know. I tell you this because it changed my life. This job paid 25 cents an hour in room and board. And 13 months later, I was drafted into the Navy. I took boot camp at Bainbridge, Maryland, and electrical school in Detroit, Michigan. the 13 weeks that I worked with Duke Power Company was doing line work. But they thought it would help me in electrical school, which did not. But I wanted to be a gunner's mate. And after it all turned out like it did, I was glad that I was an electrician. But after electrical school in Detroit, the Navy assembled 1,500 of us in the Fargo building in Boston, Mass. We didn't know what the mission was going to be. After they got everybody rounded up, we went down to New York and sailed on the Queen Elizabeth for England, and wound up in Roseneath, Scotland. The British had built a fleet of a flotilla, I say, of LCFs, landing craft flak. It meant that the deck was flat with 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter guns on it, basically to shoot down airplanes. But this ship had a power vane on it that went out about, 25, 30 feet from the ship. My ship was the first ship in, after a shakedown, we went to Falmouth, England. And that's where we learned, what we were going to do. We were told to expect 40% casualties and so on. And like the gentleman said, we left out early in the morning. And when daylight come, I've never seen as many ships in my life as is in the water. But my ship was the first ship into the beach on the Utah beach, which was a beautiful beach. This power vane went out about 30 feet, 25 or 30. It was supposed to clear a mine. They said there was 1,500-pound mines in the water. The ship behind us, to our stern, either got out of this 25 or 30 feet, or the power vane didn't do what it's supposed to do, because he hit one of those mines and went straight up in the air and straight down. And we, of course, turned and came back out and anchored. We didn't see those airplanes we were supposed to see. Only 2 planes came over while I was there, and we stayed several weeks. I had a terrible storm while I was there. We came back into England, decommissioned the ships, and I got a 30-day leave, came home, back to New York, caught a train to California. I don't know, this thing, it seemed like it took forever, because every train that was coming, the tracks were single tracks at that time. We sidetracked, waited for every passenger train, everything to pay. But we ate good, and it took about 3 or 4 days. Then I picked up this LCI 707 rocket ship and went to Iwo Jima. We fired rockets on the beach all day there on D-Day. Several of these LCIs was in the underwater demolition. They were shot up, had a lot of casualties, and the ships, some of them didn't make it back, but the ones that did tied up beside the USS Nevada, and that's where I saw the first men buried at sea, the casualties from that. But we stayed there for several days, several weeks probably, I guess, and went from there to Iwo Jima, Okinawa. And we stayed there 93 days. And when we first got there, there were 12 or 15 suicide planes come over at a time. We stayed 93 days, and the day that we left, only 2 came over. And the first day, I think the first day that we were out, full day, we got word that the Japs had surrendered. And instead of getting ready to go to Japan, we came back to California, and that was it for me. I went in on the 19th day of March, 43. I came out on the 26th day of March, 46.
My name is George Hatcher. I'm from Erwin, Tennessee, and I served as the 8th Air Force on a calm and peaceful Sunday morning, December the 7th, 1941. Without provocation or warning, the Japanese Imperial Navy attacked our forces at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, sinking many of our ships and killing almost 3,000 young Americans. I had just graduated from Unicoi County High School in the class of 1940. I drove to Knoxville with some friends and joined the Army Air Corps. And after training, I was assigned to the 8th Air Force. As a radio operator, I was promoted to staff sergeant. We put 100 hours on the plane, flew it overseas the northern route, and went to Bangor, Maine, Ireland, Iceland, and back into England. And I was awakened on May the 27th, 1944. I was awakened to go on a bombing mission, my 4th. And when I went, I boarded a covered GI truck. It was raining and foggy, and I went to the mess hall to have a hearty breakfast of powdered eggs and gravy and hot biscuits. And I remember very well because it was the last sit-down meal that I would have for almost a year. We went to briefing, and they pulled a map down off the wall and showed us we were going to be bombing oil refineries and railroad marshalling yards deep inside Germany. This was 10 days before D-Day. And as we crossed the English Channel, we climbed almost 5 miles high, 27,000 feet, headed for the target. As we crossed the English Channel into occupied France, we began to receive heavy artillery fire. 3 B-17s caught fire very close to me and went down in flames. I tried to count the parachutes, hoping I'd count to 10, but most of the time it was far less. We were then attacked by Stars and Stripes, American newspaper overseas, said that there was 250 ME-109s hit us 12 o'clock high. And they shot 2 engines out, shot the oxygen system out. The navigator got 3 bullets in his shoulder. The co-pilot got a 20 millimeter through his arm and 1 through his leg, and took the hydraulic system all out. So we had to salvo our bombs and determine which way to go, to a neutral country or back to England. We decided to try to go back to England to our base to take care of our wounded. And we flew over artillery battery, and I was putting out chaff to keep, chaff is like icicles on a Christmas tree. I was putting them out, but we got 2 direct hits in a bomb bay very close to me. A piece of shrapnel struck me on the right side of the neck, knocking me unconscious. And when I woke up laying on the floor, the bell was ringing to bail out. And I looked through the small window on the right-hand side. I could see all the metal on the right wing was blown away and gone, exposing 2 gasoline tanks, and they were on fire. And the flame was running 200 feet back, and that was the side the door was on where we had to bail out. And we had never bailed out before. And so I I had to destroy the radio. I pushed 2 buttons simultaneously and run a supercharge through there and then run the radio. And I had to take my cigarette lighter and light the flimsy. That was the secret code that changed every 24 hours. Burnt that up, and then when we got hit, turned the plane over, and all tuning units and everything was everywhere. And I had to dig out and finally found my parachute. And I had on a parachute harness, so I strapped the chute on the side and got my GI shoes, which I was instructed to do, tied them on my belt so I'd have some shoes to wear when it got on the ground, because we had electric shoes, electric gloves and all. And I ran back through the fuselage and bailed out the door. Opened my parachute a little bit too soon and broke the strings on my shoes. Lost my shoes. And then we had been yelling and shooting, and we had 13 50 caliber machine guns on that plane, and it was a lot of noise, a lot of yelling and shooting and everything. I looked at my watch, and it was 1:30 in the afternoon. We'd been in combat 7.5 hours. And it was quiet. It was so quiet, the plane is gone, and I closed my eyes and thanked the Lord that I was still alive. And I began to look, trying to figure out which way to go when I landed. I wanted to be with some of my crew. Well, I didn't have much sensation of falling, but finally I hit the ground and hit it very hard, much harder than I expected. And I was getting ready to hide. I took my parachute off and getting ready to hide it when I heard a voice behind me that I'd never heard before, and of course couldn't understand. And I didn't know it was free French or what, so I continued to take my parachute off. When I did, I heard him eject a shell in his rifle. I understand what he's talking about then. So I put my hands up, and 3 Germans came over and wanted to know if I had a pistol. I said no. They said, are you Americano? Said, are you English? I said no. They said, Americano? I said yes. So they took my dog tags, and they took my fountain pen and took my watch. I had a ring just like this one on my finger, and I turned it inside out, put it in my hand in my pocket, and I got away with keeping it. They didn't see it, I don't think. But anyway, one guard got me by one arm, the other was gouging me in the back with his rifle. And they was trying to make me run, which they was dragging me off a little steep hill into a small town. When I got down to town, it was a brick street, and both sides of the street were lined with people. They had clubs and sticks, and they was yelling insults at me, hollering Luft gangster and swine and all that stuff. And I looked, the guards kept pushing me through the town. There's one man, German, standing out there in the middle of the street with his hands on his hips, spraddle-legged, looking at me in contempt. And I knew he was trouble when I saw him, and they pushed me right up to him. So I tried to steer the guards around, but they straightened me back up and made me go right up to him. So when he got up there, he began to try to hit me with his fist. And of course, I was fighting a losing battle. I wasn't no way I could win. So I pushed and pulled the guards back and forth. I'd go into him and come back, and when he started hitting, I'd back off a little bit, and I'd give myself a little bit of room. We flayed around there for a few minutes, and finally he gave up, and he didn't do me very much damage. Then they took and put me in a building, must have been the townhouse or something, and they had all my crew in there that was stripped off naked. And they was trying to find out how many men was on the crew. The pilot, we didn't know at that time, but the pilot was loose for 10 days before they ever caught him. He broke his leg when he landed, and he stood as long as he could and knocked on the wrong door. And anyway, then they took me from there to Dulag Luft for an interrogation center. And a little German had on a white shirt and a red bow tie, and he said, for you, the war's over. And he said, this is a story here from the International Red Cross. And I looked and had about 40 fill in the question blanks. The top line was the name, rank, and serial number. And then they wanted to know who the commanding officer was, and how many guns on the ship, and how many people on there. And I filled out named Rankin Schildermer and hand it back to him. And he tried to get me to fill out some more, but I refused. And anyway, then they took me and put me in a bullpen. No, they took me up to the top of the mountain where this artillery battery was that shot us down. It was manned by Hitler Youth. They had all khaki shirts, all khaki shorts. They were about 12 or 15 years old. And they took us up there to show the people what they did and trying to encourage them. And my navigator, he was Jewish. And we all knew what Hitler was doing to the Jews. We tried to get him to change his dog tags, but he wouldn't do it. He thought, well, like the rest of us, we'll go over and fly 25 missions and come back. But anyway, he was mortally wounded, and they picked him up and pitched him up on top of the truck. And instead of taking him to a medic or somewhere, they drove us to the top of the mountain where this artillery battery was, and my kids, and they took her picture. One of the kids did, and I've got the picture at home, and I usually show it when I tell my story. And then they took me to Dulag Luft. No, they first took me into a dungeon. They brought me back off the hill, put me in a dungeon, and they raised a trap door and I went in there and put me in a small room there with a door on it. And it was very small. And I hadn't eaten anything since before daylight that morning. I was getting pretty weak from hunger. And they put two pieces of black bread in a jar of stale water. And I sat down on a small wooden bench. The only light that was in there was the lantern that the guards carried. And when they left, went back out the trapdoor, it was dark. And I got to thinking my mother was going to receive a telegram. And that was going to just about break her heart, I guess. But I got to thinking, well, I'm a Christian. I was born and raised in a church. I remember the Bible said God will never leave you nor forsake you. And he'll never put on you more than you can bear. And that gave me a lot of hope, and I remember those words all through my captivity. They took me there after a few days to Dulag Luft, where they interrogated me, and I gave them the name Rankin Schildermer, that was all. Then they took me to see some Catholic nuns, and I got a pair of shoes that was wonderful. Pair of black English leather shoes, and they gave me one pair of pants and one shirt, which I never had it laundered. I never had it off. I slept in it and everything. And they gave me a sweater and a cap and a couple of packs of cigarettes. Then they put me on a train, took me to Stalag Luft 4. Well, that's where I met the Urban Nine. There's 9 of us that grew up and went to school together in Unicoi County High School. And we all joined the Army Air Corps, all got shot down, all wound up in the same prison camp, which was after they had over 50 prison camps, and we were all in the same camp. And the first group I was the first for Urban 9 men to come there. And the first bunch of prisoners they brought in, they told us that the invasion had started. And they said, well, you'll be home for Christmas. Well, I knew it was just a rumor, but it was something I could think about and hope for. And time went on, and the camp kept getting more. They put 26 men in a room, and one loaf of bread and one cup of soup in the morning. And that was all. Next morning, same thing. And the soup, I called it Green Death. It was neither hot nor cold, didn't have any salt or seasoning in it. And you better not look in it if you want to eat it, because there's some stuff in there that you couldn't bear to eat. But that went on, and I'd take that little piece of bread and take a pinch off it and put it in my pocket, try to make it last all day so I'd have a morsel to eat just before I went to sleep. I slept on a bunk bed with no mattress or made out of rough lumber and no pillow, no quilt or nothing. And the latrine was in the middle of the compound, and it was made out of rough lumber. It was like an old-timey, it had holes sawed out in it, about 40 holes or so in it. And it had openings for doors and windows, but no doors or windows. That wasn't too bad in the summertime, but in the wintertime, it was 40 below zero, and you're trying to wade the snow and get through there. It was very, very miserable. And finally Christmas came, almost Christmas, and we began to hear some noise way back in the far off thunder, and they began to bring in a lot of prisoners from the Belgian bogs. And then the Germans began to tell us that they was winning the war, that America was being bombed and New York City was devastated. So anyway, we thought that was right. And anyway, when Christmas came, we sang Christmas carols, and we sang Silent Night, and it was cold, very cold. We was all huddled around a little old stove. And I remembered a song that was written by a Union prisoner of war during the Great Civil War. And the name of the song was Tramp, Tramp, Tramp. And the words go something like this: tramp, 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 the boys are marching. Cheer up, comrades, they will come. And beneath the starry flag, we will breathe the air again in the free land of our own beloved home. In my prison cell I sit, thinking, mother dear, of you, in a bright and happy home so far away. And the tears, they fill my eyes, in spite of all that I could do, though I try to cheer my comrades and be gay. It went on like that until about the first week of February. We began to hear heavy bombs and artillery in the far off distance. The Germans began to run back and forth, and we knew something was wrong. So the Russians broke across the Rhine River, across the Baltic Sea, and was heading that way, and they rushed us out and put us in boxcars, a 40 by 8 boxcar. That means 40. It's made for 40 men or 8 horses. And they put 70 men in each car, had one bucket for a toilet for 70 men, and no water for the first 3 days. And we were being bombed by American bombers and English bombers. And they finally opened the door and gave each one of us 1 cup of water. And then we went on for several more days, 2 or 3 more days. And we come to Nuremberg. They took us off the train at Nuremberg and put us in a prison camp there. And the Americans was bombing Nuremberg every day and RAF every night. And we dug trenches in there with whatever we could, tin cans and boards off the. And when the shrapnel started falling, we dug sled trenches, just go out there and stand in that sled trench, with ice water up to your knees, with a board over your head, trying to keep the shrapnel from busting your brains out. And they had the bunk beds in there and had the straw in it, and the straw was mildewed. It wasn't good to sleep in, but it harbored body lice and fleas, and we got contaminated with that. They got eat up with the vermin. And we was there, I believe, 6 weeks, and they told us that we could hear some heavy artillery the other way, and it was General Patton's Third Army coming this way. He broke across the Rhine, and the Germans didn't want us to be liberated. They was trying to march out, and we had a German Captain Wolfe took about, I guess, 100 of us, and he told us, he said, if you see any planes in the sky, it'll be American planes. If you will agree to come back, we'll let you disperse in an air raid. So we added 3 American colonels, prisoners of war too. They was with us, and we agreed to that. And we was 4 hours out of Nuremberg when we got strafed by 7 P-47s. And I run through the woods trying to find a big tree, but there's all little trees. Anyway, I found one, and after a while I come back, and they'd shot up pretty much. And these American colonels asked if anyone had any white cloth, towels or T-shirts or anything, and they took them up, and they took the white cloth and made the letters AAFPOW. And we sat down on them and waited for the planes to come back. And after a while they came back, and we didn't think they saw the sign, but they finally did, and they come down and give us a pretty good show. And we knew then that they'd go back and tell S2 that who we were and where we were. And then we were pretty well safe from American planes from then on. And we walked all day and all that day and the next day. And the Germans was trying to make us hurry. And I had on a Unicoi County High School class ring, and this German guard had a loaf of black bread tied around his shoulder. He was on a bicycle. And I traded him my class ring for that loaf of black bread. And I shared it with my crew that was with me. And we went on and walked till dark and got up in a patch of woods, and we all laid down and in the rain and without shelter or anything. And these colonels passed the word around, said in the morning when the Germans start to move you out, to kill as much time as you can. So we hope General Patton will overrun us and liberate us. So we, the next morning before daylight, they come and roust, and we'd get up pretending to go, and they'd go get another group down, and we'd lay back down on the ground. They'd come get us down, and they'd lay back down on the ground. And that went on for about 10 or 11 o'clock, and the German guards all got mad, and they was shooting, hollering, and shouting. And they all left and went off down the road, all the guards did, and Captain Wolf called us together. He said, "You're free to go." I said, "I don't have any guards to take care of it, but if you'll stay with me, I'll protect you from the Nazis and all." So I stayed with him, and all of us did. He said, "Because it'll only be a fortnight until I will be your prisoner." And I asked him how long a fortnight was. He said it's 10 days. So we went on into Moosburg, and we was up there a pretty good while. And one day I looked out the window, out the flap of I was in a tent with about 400 prisoners. And an American Jeep come up the road with a white flag on it, and it went back down the road. Come to find out, they come up there, asked them if they would surrender, and they said no. So they shot up the place there pretty good. And General Patton come in there with his tank and run it through the fence. And we had instructions not to leave the camp if liberated. But I was hungry, and I couldn't stay in there with a big hole in the fence. And I run me and some Russians through the fence. And I got up there in town, and the tanks, American tanks, was coming up and stopping and going, stopping and going. And I hollered at the first tank coming up if it had anything to eat in there. And he said, yeah. So he throwed me off a can of beans and franks. And they went tumbling off down the hill. It's pretty steep there. And me and two Russians took off after it. And I outrun them and got the beans from them. And then I began to ask if anybody in them tanks was from Tennessee. One guy, the first tank, he said, yeah, we got somebody from Tennessee. And he stuck his head up after a while, and he said, "Say you're from Tennessee?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What part of Tennessee?" I think so. Nobody ever heard tell of Irwin, a little old town like that. I said, "I'm from around Johnson City." He said, "Well, I'm from Irwin." So he was his Buster Wilson. I knew him well, but I didn't recognize him with a helmet on. So anyway, they took us out in the field. First, they took us to the mess hall, and gave us, when I went in the mess hall, I saw loaves of black bread. And I got 2 or 3 of them, stuck them in my shirts, and they said there'd be plenty of white bread here tomorrow. So then they took us and see a doctor, and they gave us some vaccinations, and they weighed me, and I weighed 134 pounds. I'd weighed 169 when I was in there. I'd lost 35 pounds. And then they took us out in the field and took all of our clothes and shoes off and piled them up and poured gasoline on them and set them on fire and gave us a new uniform and squirted white powder on us. They done that 3 times. Then they gave us they put us on a plane and a truck, either one we could, and went to Le Havre, France, where we was waiting on a ship to bring us back to America. And when they brought us, they gave us a partial payment of $20. And when I got on the ship, a man came around the ship and says, "Anybody want anything from the store?" We didn't have any candy or sweets or anything. And I said, "Do you have any candy in that store?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How much can I buy?" And he said, "Well, you can buy all you want." I said, "Bring me 24 bars of Hershey's chocolate." And he did. And I ate 2 of them each day for 12 days. and pulled into New York Harbor about 10 o'clock at night, 10:30, and it was dark. I remembered what the Germans said that New York City was devastated, and I walked the deck all night, spent a sleepless night worrying and waiting to see what New York City looked like. Well, when it finally got daylight and the sun came up and I could see the Empire State Building and the sun shining on, beautiful and untouched by the war. And I looked to my left and saw the Statue of Liberty. It was the first time I'd ever seen the Statue of Liberty. My eyes filled up with tears. I knew that my horrible ordeal was finally over, and I was going home. Thank you.
Well, my name is Bill Johnson. I'm from Virginia, really, and
if you'll talk to Chris, forget that I'm here, okay?
And I was ended up in high school, kind of interested in flying. We really didn't have enough money to send me down to Virginia Tech, so I asked my dad to send me to California to work in the aircraft industry, which I did for a bit, but I didn't get into flying as I wanted to, so I came back to Virginia and ended up in Baltimore running the crane for Bethlehem Steel when the Air Force reduced the requirements for flight training to high school education and instead of 2 years of college. So I went downtown Baltimore and joined up and passed everything and ended up going through flying school. And because I shot a good dive bombing training mission, they sent me over to Tampa, Florida to fly A-24 dive bombers. And later that summer, they were having trouble in the Aleutian Islands, being shot down by the Japs on Kiska that was trying to bomb them out of Kiska. So we formed a two squadron group and flew A-24 dive bombers all the way from Tampa, Florida to the Aleutian Islands and ran 3 missions on Kiska and found out that the Japs had gone. So we turned around and came back to Tampa. And then I was assigned to P-47 Thunderbolt training and went down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana and trained and when I finished up, I ended up going to Europe on the Queen Mary in about the 1st of April and joined the 366 Fighter Group that had been formed in Virginia and was then operating out of Thruxton, England. And so I was in England and had a chance to fly 16 missions with the group before D-Day. And on D-Day, when we finally found out the night before that it was going to happen the next morning, and we didn't get much sleep, and we all got up and got briefed and took off at 5:38 in the morning with 2 500-pound bombs and headed across the channel in the dark and could see by the time we got to the channel and halfway over anyhow, we could see all those ships all over the channel, and we're headed for some gun emplacements on the shore on Omaha Beach. And we had we got in series and dropped those 500-pound bombs on those gun emplacements. And then we had a few bombs left, so we ended up chasing some convoys behind the beachhead and shot up a lot of, used up all our ammunition on some trucks and that was trying to supply the Nazi. So, and then that afternoon, I flew the last mission of the day. We flew the second, that was my second mission across the channel that day. And we did similar things that time around. So we had a big day on D-Day, and I'm real proud of having been a part of it.
My name is Irving Nutter. I served in Normandy as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne, and the pilot we had got off course and dumped us 10 miles from the designated area in a field, and luckily the field was in, there was some farmers there that were real friendly people, and they guided us back to get back behind the lines where we could get back and see what was going on. But it was a scary situation when you get dumped somewhere where you don't know where in the world you're at. And all you got's that clicker, and you got a few people that's got a clicker too, and they're as bad a shape as you are. Nobody knows where in the heck you was at.
What beach were you supposed to land on?
We were supposed to land in Normandy, on the beachhead of Normandy.
Which one? You remember Omaha?
I don't remember which one it was. No.
How long did it take you to get back to the beachhead?
It probably took at least a good day and a half to get back. We had no idea in the world where in the world we was at, and luckily these farmers showed us how to get back.
They walk you the whole way?
Well, they walked us the biggest part of the way back and gave us good directions where we could get back.
And then when you get back, you have the enemy in between you and the beach.
Yeah, we was able to get around the enemy because they was familiar with the whole area over in there, and they guided us back around and showed us how to get back out again, back to our own lines.
How long were you in Normandy?
We was in Normandy probably the whole time. Maybe we was there a week before we got pulled back out. Now, a lot of them was in there a lot longer than we was, but with the 82nd, they took us out quick so we could recuperate again.
Then what was next?
I didn't do anything else until we got down to the Bulge. Then we went through the Bulge, and we was lucky going through the Bulge. We didn't have any problems there, but the 101st came through, and they tore the devil out of the 101st. We lucked out real good there.
How long were you over there in Europe total?
In total in Europe, I was probably about 4 years.
Quite a while.
Well, after we pulled back and the war was over with, General Eisenhower won the 104th Airborne as his honor guard in Berlin. So I signed up for that, went up and signed on his honor guard, and that ended. Then they wanted a U.S. Army ski team. So I signed up for the ski team and was on that for about 3 months. And come back from that, then they wanted to send me to Ober and Niederreifenberg to open up a recreation area. And I was probably up there by about 9 months opening that area up. And it scared the devil out of me because me and another fellow was the only Americans up there. The rest of them was all Germans. We had German prisoners doing the work, and we had to build a ski lift and toboggan slides and a skating rink. And all the time you was there, you was wondering, well, is it safe here or is it not? Because we was just killing them people. Now we're living with them. So that's when I come back to the States. I come back to the States in '47.
I'm Virginia Miley from Hendersonville, North Carolina. War was war, and the women played their part, and the home families did. They don't tell you about the rationing books that we had. We had a book for meat, we had one for sugar, we had one for tires, and a couple of others. There was a whole packet you carry around. And when it came to tires, we had a vacation, and we went from Paterson, New Jersey, up to Lake Champlain with another couple. And to make things equitable, they had to take 2 tires off their car and put it on our car so that they'd wear the rubber as much as we would. Once a month, we would have a collection for the war effort with all the metal you could gather, tin pans, lids, anything you could. That went on. Over in New York City, the old Times Square that you might be familiar with the camel sign where the man is smoking, the perfect smoke ring that comes out, that was black. There wasn't anything on the square. It was jet black. How sensitive it was with light. We were up on Garrett Mountain, which is a mountain outside of Paterson, New Jersey. We were having a picnic up at the top, and we had a fire, roasting some potatoes, having a good time, sitting there watching the light reflect on the city in New York City. That was always pretty, the light, the windows catching the sunlight and reflecting it. We were tapped on the shoulder and said, "Put that fire out." Why? It can be seen from the ocean. There might be a sub out there, and that's a light. You didn't want any lights. And the same thing kind of took place on our home. Warden came along and knocked on the door and said, "Turn your radio off or pull the shade down." The little tube, the little light in the tube was too much. So it wasn't really rough. We just had to manage things and so on, but we knew we were in war.
My name is James Blackburn Whistman, and I went through boot camp in Great Lakes, and when I finished boot camp, the officer come in and says, "I need 10 men." And nobody wouldn't volunteer. They get scared of that, you know. And he said, we didn't volunteer, so he said, "Line up out here in the bunks, and I'll pick out 10 of the biggest men in this company." And he did, and he called us, we all come out and stand in front of the bunch there, and he says, "Now I'm going to tell you where you're going." And he says, "No, you don't know where you're going." And he says, "None of you don't know." And said, "You're going in the armed guard." And says, "You ain't coming back. None of you coming back. You figure on that." And that was the tale. And I just thought I'd tell you how I got in the armed guard. But I had a brother in it too, in the armed guard. And I think the first ship out, he got slumped. First ship. They left going there to England, somewhere in Europe, I don't know. Anyhow, the officer said, "You boys ain't coming back." Of course, we didn't know what he was talking about anyhow, you know, not really. Of course, they sent us to gunnery school, but we got a week, 4 weeks of gunnery school. That's all we got. 4 weeks, and we was sent us to New York, and the next day before daylight, we was on board the ship, done outside the breakwater. I served on 2 gasoline tankers, and then I got put on this merchant, this transport, and then I come into Normandy that way. We had a load of 82nd paratroopers, I think.
My name is Stephen Zager, and my exposure to Normandy was sort of in the tangential fashion. I was on board ship on a destroyer escort, and we were doing supporting protection for this invasion. At the time of it, I was not really aware that this was an invasion. We could sense and see the armament, the fire, the smoke, the battle going on, and we were on the periphery protecting this armada from submarine activity, which was prevalent in the North Atlantic. And in doing so, we were doing just patrol duty, and consequently, I never really got, into the heat of battle, but it was there and it was very apparent. Prior to all of this, in order to create the material and manpower for it, it took convoys, many convoys, to carry planes, weaponry, manpower, the likes of seeing airplanes strapped to the sides of Liberty ships, locomotives, tractors, tanks, all exposed on the sides of Liberty ships that were making the trip across the Atlantic. So there was tremendous preparation for this. I might add a feat that I think is rather noteworthy. Before I was 21, I had made 9 trips across the Atlantic Ocean, and this was all in convoy duty. And in the course of that time, aside from the Battle of D-Day, we encountered submarines and engaged in activity with them, suppressed a couple of them, and one was actually captured and brought back to the States, and from what I understand, I believe it's on exhibit in the area of Chicago, Illinois. So it's kind of a museum piece as a relic of the war. But the heat of combat was prevalent wherever you went, and you knew that activity would essentially come to an end, and it took something like D-Day to bring it about. Today was a very wonderful day to memorialize the men and women who partook in that event. It just is a saddened note that we celebrated, but by the same token, needed to take a moment to remember those who contributed with their lives and were not there today. So it was a mixed feeling of honor and tribute to those who gave us the privilege of being where we are today. So I respect that, and certainly I would like to offer a thank you to the guardians and the honor heir who made all this possible, because it never would have occurred. And furthermore, as a result of that, it has been very comforting to enjoy this experience. So frankly, that's about it for me.
W.C. Hensley, Jr. I graduated at 17, went to the highway department for 3 months. I said, this is not for me. I was exempt, I didn't have to work. I said, I'm going to let the rest of them leave, so I joined the Navy and finished my boot camp and went on to Pennsylvania, picked up LST 287. And left there and came on down to Mississippi, got everything ready, come on to every place they're getting everything done to them, putting the guns and everything on. And we came on the last trip around, we got to Boston and got all the ammunition. And left there and went to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I left Christmas Day in 1943, going across the North Atlantic, which is cold. And I was in the engine room, and I told the guys, I said, if that torpedo hits, I'm going down this thing. I ain't going to hit that cold water. So we went to Milford Haven, Wales. From there, we went on to Southampton in Plymouth, worked out of there, training all the time. And we left that morning, we went to first wave. We hit Gold Beach with the Canadian, mostly Canadian troops. And we had to, we're supposed to go in at 6, and they had to wave us off because some of those anchors had to move off right quick, you know. And we went on in, And of course, a VP boat, I go in with the VP. There was guys having to go down the Jacob's Ladder. How they done it, I don't know. It loaded like they was. And we was going in, of course, there's a lot of strafing, but not like Omaha. Ours was not that bad. And of course, anything's bad and more. But then we loaded wounded and prisoners to go back. And we worked there ever so they'd have to go back, take two. But we'd go into Cherbourg where we didn't have to hit the beach. We was going to Atlantic. And we'd take our troops in, and we was equipped to bring injured and prisoners back. And we did it by 52 trips. And after that, we came back here. I came out, came up there to Norfolk. They sent me off my ship up to Little Creek. And from there, I went in the hospital for 6 months. And after that, they got rid of me.
What were you in the hospital for?
COPD, lungs. And they keep saying TB, but it wasn't TB. But I was fortunate, but I stayed in reserve, but they didn't have amphibious. I had to go into Seabees. And in '52, they put me on disability. So, completely. So that was the story of my life.
Very good.
And it's been experience, to say the least. But I'm not, well, I feel I'm glad I went in. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but you don't want to go through it but one time. And if we could get the people in the United States to understand this, what's more, then they'd straighten out.
My name is Hesh, H-E-S-H, Brohinsky. I was a corporal in the 227th Field Artillery Battalion, 29th Division. I was on the instrument detail, and our job was to run surveys to put the guns in firing position. We also tested them for accuracy and then effect, and we were also members of the forward observation crew. About mid-April, before D-Day, we were sent into a marshalling area in Cornwall, Western England. It was more like an internment camp. No passes, no mail in or out. All our personal effects, extraneous personal effects, were taken and shipped to Missouri, to be reclaimed after the war. Our ODs were exchanged for impregnated ODs, which were very greasy, and they were supposedly for protection against a gas attack. I was in charge of 2 current event programs, and the only reason I mention it is one of the items that I'd read the news item, and then there would be an open discussion. And one of the items was that the United Mine Workers were on strike right in the midst of our war effort. Of course, there was a big uproar, and one individual in our outfit, Sergeant Prokopovich, he defended it, probably a former miner himself. And it ended up where he said, "My president is John L. Lewis." That's the only reason I mention it. As for the D-Day, we, just prior to being loaded, June 1st, midnight of June 1st, on LST-292. We were informed Omaha Beach, Dog Red, and we were told that our rendezvous point was 5 miles inland. We hugged the coast, and as morning of D-Day morning dusk, we were about a mile from shore. All you could see were barrage balloons and ships. At the beach, riding parallel to the beach, was a lone destroyer, just firing incessantly. About 10:30 in the morning, we were loaded onto an LCI, landing craft infantry. And they tried to take us in. We were probably about a couple of 100 yards from the shore, and they turned us back. In the late afternoon, they attempted again, and that was aborted. We then returned to our LST. About dusk, 4 German planes came over. They herded us down in a hole and locked us in. One individual attempted to get out, refused to be locked in. And as I think about it today, it might have been 2 individuals. But I was 22 years old, and ha ha ha. In the meantime, we thought we were being strafed. But it was the anti-aircraft shell casings hitting the steel deck right above us. The German planes dropped one big bomb that evidently was relatively near us because it rocked the boat pretty good. That was basically it. On D+1, they took us in. We got to the shoreline, to the beach line. Our artillery general and division general were in confab, and we were stuck at the beach edge for about 20 minutes. But there was relatively no firing going on. It was all in the distance above us. Along the beach was German barbed wire, and enmeshed in the barbed wire was one GI. Rigor mortis had set in, and his left arm was hanging in the air. He had a watch on his hand, and I remember I wondered if the watch had stopped. I thought of time cliches. In the meantime, along the dunes, not too far, maybe about 30 feet, 4 GIs were sitting. They obviously had been drugged, and they're sitting stiff, staring wide-eyed out to sea. They had tags on them. They were going to be taken off. And that was basically my experience. At some point, we were then were able to get up. Our landing point was just east of Vierville-sur-Mer. We got on top of the dunes, and then there was sporadic firing. We were jumping on trucks, off trucks, on trucks, and whatnot. And that's basically my D-Day experience.
It's going to be a living testament from what my father told me about the B-26 Martin Marauders that he was in, 9th Air Force, 394th Bomber Squadron in the European theater in England. His plane was called the Mary Sue. It was named after the colonel's daughters, Mary and Sue. That was from Colonel Vance and Major Hale. Major Hale being the co-pilot and Colonel Vance being the pilot. My dad was the crew chief of the Mary Sue. A very big but very nice, gentle father, over 6 feet, brown hair, blue eyes. I always remember him telling me all the missions he did in the Mary Sue. And both him and his brother were in the war together in the summer of '42. My dad's name was Theo Bowers, and his brother's name was Bo Bowers. And they flew several missions. I have all his World War II pictures where he's wrote on the back of them, you know, all the different missions he flew. Starting from the very few, which was his 5, until the end of the war. At the end of the war, around 45, he had 72 missions on that plane, 72 bombs racked up on the Mary Sue, and none of them was aborted. And that's how he received the Bronze Star, which I have still today, for a testament of the Mary Sue. After the war, Theo and Bo received commissions after the war.
Good. What we're going to do is just tell me your name and then tell us about how you served in the Normandy campaign. So you were the first wave.
He helped load the first missile and helped shoot the first one that was shot on Normandy.
What was your rank? And how long were you there?
Was there 13 days and then went out and come back in.
Okay. And which beaches were you bombing? Where you were shooting your missiles?
What beach did you shoot your missile on? No, what beach did you shoot your missile on? Oh.
What else do you remember about being over there?
Very rough, huh?
And what did you do after D-Day? How long did you stay over there?
How long did you stay after D-Day? How long was you still in the service?
Battle in both theaters then, both the Pacific and the Atlantic. And when did you come back home?
When did you come back home? You were gone 30 months from the time you left. And he had to get his principal at high school had to have him deferred till he could graduate after he was already drafted.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell us that you remember or want us to know?
I was up in that youngest one in the division. We did over there.
The youngest one on his ship when he was over there.
And how old were you then?